and welcome back to the Dreamcast. I am your host, Denise Walsh. I combine science, scripture, and stories that will inspire you to dive deep, break through your own personal glass ceiling, and design a life of your dreams.
Welcome back to the Dreamcast. In today's episode, I am interviewing somebody who basically experiences success in everything that he does. He has experienced success as an online marketer, as a Christian music executive, a convention promoter, podcaster, and is currently a top earner in a leading network marketing company. He has a vast array of knowledge, and whatever he touches seems to turn to gold. And it's because of his hard work, his focus. He's basically a goal getter. I met him because of his podcast, The Courage Cast, and I'm excited for you to hear his story of not only how he's been able to experience success in the business world, but also within his family. He lives with his wife, Krissy, and their 3 children in Franklin, Tennessee. So big Dreamcast welcome to Eric Nordhoff.
Well, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks, Denise.
Yay. All right. Well, I know we've talked several times this week, and I had an opportunity to be on your podcast, which is the Courage Cast, which I just love your name. And we were actually referred to each other through a mutual friend, Mary Beth, and she was hearing a bit about what the Dreamcast was all about and what I'm working on. And she said, oh my gosh, you have got to meet Eric. And so we connected this week, and I can tell you it lit a fire in me, and I was just so grateful to get to know you. And now I'm excited to hear a bit more of your story, because I know you've done a lot. Like you do a lot of really, really cool things. So tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got there.
Well, you lit a fire in me this week as well. I have to just tell you, since you came on my podcast on Tuesday, I think it was Tuesday. Yeah. You just a few days ago, I have downloaded the Earl Nightingale book that you recommended, The Strangest Secret. And I've listened to it 3 times already since then, 3 days in a row, and absolutely love it. It's really, really changed my thinking and made me aware of what I'm thinking about. So I want to thank you, first of all, before we even, dive into my story. Your story and your recommendation is impacting my story.
Awesome. That is good to hear. Yes. When your mind is blown, you're like, oh my gosh, everybody needs to hear this.
Yes. All right. Exactly. And I've shared it with a lot of people too.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you took action on that. Where do you live now? Are you in Tennessee? Georgia?
I'm in Nashville.
Nashville? Okay.
Nashville, Tennessee. Yeah. So I moved here in the mid-90s to start working in the music industry. That was my goal and dream 20 years ago.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So my wife and I, which is Mary Beth's sister, we met because we both wanted to work in the music industry. Now, she is incredibly talented, singer, songwriter, and she came here to pursue her dream to be a songwriter, really to be an artist. And then she realized she had this gift for songwriting, which is really kind of flourished and bloomed. So I've been grateful to see that sort of happen. But for me, I moved here because I wanted to do a bunch of things. I wanted to work in the music industry, both as a piano player. I have an instrumental series that I have composed and arranged and released. It's called Quiet Time Music. And it's just a very peaceful, relaxing piano with some strings music. A lot of it is original, but some of it's known songs. But I'm moved here with that passion to record albums and record music, and I'm grateful I was able to do that. But I also had a business skill, and my father had me listening to Dale Carnegie books and Brian Tracy books when I was 18, 19 years old. My father would recommend these. He was a salesperson, and I had just when I was 16, I took the Dale Carnegie public speaking and human effectiveness course, and it really, really gave me a lot of confidence. For 12 weeks, I'd go in there and I was the 16-year-old boy hanging out with these adults in their 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s who were learning to speak in public for the very first time. And I was grateful I was able to, while my brain was still forming, developing, I was able to kind of have this in my brain when I was 16 years old and form this skill at that age. And that really impacted me.
Oh my goodness. I can imagine. Not only was your dad somebody who was a growth mindset and learning and growing and reading and challenging himself and staying in a place of abundance and growth, right? So you're seeing that played out in life, but then you also had the ability to go in and learn it firsthand yourself at such a young age. That's awesome.
Yeah. It was really impactful. I don't even remember fighting him on it. Like my boys, I started talking to them about doing the same thing, and I got a big fight from them. But I don't remember fighting with my dad about it. I just thought, okay, well, this is something that I think if he recommends it, I'll do it. And I tried it, and I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot of great skills. Became very comfortable speaking in front of others, and more than that, I felt very comfortable relating to others. I was able to ask good questions and learn that I should take an interest in other people. And the more I take an interest in other people in a sincere way, the more it's going to benefit me in my life. And that's where that was rooted in. And reading How to Win Friends and Influence People was one of the best books that I've ever read in terms of just self-improvement. So I kind of came to Nashville with this desire to go for my dreams, and that I also had some business skill and savvy in communicating with other people. So that's kind of what brought me here and where I was at 23 years old when I first arrived here.
Okay. So you get there, you've got these big dreams, these big hopes. You're 23, the world's your oyster. Was it as easy as you thought?
No, it wasn't. When I first got here, I started dealing with my fears. I started dealing with things that I hadn't realized before. First of all, the people here are incredibly talented, creative people. So I was so intimidated by how good a quality these musicians were that I just was not really in their league in terms of talent from a piano playing talent. But I didn't let that just kind of determine my destiny. I still ended up producing my own instrumental piano. I've sort of found my niche in that space and loved it. And I'm grateful I was able to record 10 albums. But I was very intimidated by those people. So I leaned more towards doing the business. And so I headed up, I was able to, in a very short amount of time, get a job working in international sales. And that was a great opportunity. I also spoke German. That was my first language, was German. So to have this international background already as a kid, going over to Germany when I was, 8 years old on my own, spending time with my grandparents and all my family over in Germany. My dad, I'm an only child, so my dad would send me off over the summer, and I'd spend 4 weeks with my grandmother and grandfather. We just had I just had a great experience. We'd travel all around Europe and experience new things and different things. And I was really grateful for that. So that international experience opened up the door for me to take the work I did as the head of international sales for Warner Alliance. And then later after that, I was working at a company called Word Entertainment, and then also Provident Music Group. And so those were great. Those first 10 years in business were really, really, I was very fortunate, but I'd always had this entrepreneurial bent. And at during that entire time, it didn't help that entrepreneurial bent it didn't help that I was listening to these books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which impacted me greatly, and The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. And then, of course, Cash Flow Quadrant. And I learned about the power of you spending your money wisely, understanding what is an asset, what is a liability, understanding that I needed to live in the business quadrant and the investor quadrants, those two quadrants, rather than living in the employee and the self-employed quadrant mindset of the way I was doing business. So I had always said to my wife, I wanted to start a business. I was excited about that. So after 10 years of working in Christian music, I started my own international licensing and distribution company, which was a real scary thing because I had a young boy who was 5 at the time, just going into kindergarten, and another boy that was 3, still in preschool. And I was home all the time, and I had nothing. I had no one providing for me except for my own energy and my own effort. And that was scary, but also incredibly exhilarating at the time.
Ooh, I think it sounds like you had that kind of brewing in your belly for a while. You knew that you wanted to do something different, and it came a point where you just had to take action, but yet there is still a risk. There's still a bit of fear. There was still the unknown. There was still, I have a family, and all of the worry thoughts that can pop in when we want to take a step in another direction. So what did you do when you made that pivot? Tell me about that transition.
Well, I was grateful I knew I wanted to start my own company, and I had a good relationship with my boss at the time when I was still working and employed by Warner Brothers. And I said to my boss, listen, I want to leave. There was layoffs going on. The music industry was cutting, was downsizing. Everybody, iTunes was just kind of becoming a thing, and the iPod was taking over. And very quickly, of course, the iPhone was released soon after that. This was 2004. And I told him, I said, listen, I'd really like to do my own thing. Technology then was really emerging, and I could create my own website and begin to service what I was doing through the internet. And I really love the idea of working online and connecting with people all around the world on my own. So I told my boss about 9 months before I was actually before I actually left. I told him, listen, I'd like to leave, and I'd like to work on a plan to leave. And so we were able to work on a plan. And one of the best things I ever did was hire a coach, a personal coach, a business coach that could help me. And I hired him for 3 months. The 3 months before I left Warner Brothers, I worked with this coach every week for 90 days. And it was one of the best things because I was able, one of the things I didn't even know at the time, but I'm a verbal processor. I like to speak things out loud and then see what sticks. So in some case, like my wife and I have a very different way of dealing with things. Like she is an internal processor. She will think about things, and then when she says something, it's like exactly what she wants to say. When I speak, sometimes I will say it and then I'm like, oh no, that doesn't sound right. That's not what I want to do. So once I kind of see it out there, it changes for me. And it's been interesting that Krissy and I had that dynamic, because she would say, well, you just said you wanted to do this. Oh no, I didn't really mean that. I just wanted to hear what it sounded like. So that was kind of a confusing thing for us to deal with, and an amusing thing for us to deal with too. But the coach helped me because I could speak it out, and then he would repeat it back to me, and I would say, oh no, that's actually not what I really want to do. He helped me define what I wanted to do, how I wanted to structure my business, who my partners were going to be, what my goals were going to be, who I was going to call on day one. And I had the first 90 days of my business planned before I even left my work. And that gave me a lot of confidence. Stepping into an unknown place was preparation, rehearsing. It was a lot of rehearsing, a lot of planning and preparing. While I was still gainfully employed, I could immediately step in and earn money in the first month, even though it took me about 2 years to really get to replace my income. It took about 2 years, but we made it.
Okay. I think that's really interesting, because a lot of times we think that we have to jump in 110%, both feet, no looking back. And you took the time to to plan and to prepare, so that way when you did step out, you were fully ready. And it wasn't just learning.
Yeah.
It was like putting pen to paper. It was like reorganizing your life and creating new contacts and organizing what your workday would look like and all of the things that go in the back end of a business. So it seems like you were ready when it actually launched.
Yes. And it was the best. I think I only spent $2,000 for those 90 days, but it was the best investment anybody can make. A lot of people poo-poo coaches or might think that working with a personal coach or a business coach is not a good use of your money. It doesn't seem like it is, but for me, it's invaluable. And it did set me off on the right, pace right from the very beginning.
So what is the business that you started? What do you do now?
The business I started then was Go Global Entertainment, and it was an international licensing and distribution company. We had agreements with that enabled our artists. I was working with independent artists and labels and production houses, and was able to represent them. I was a middleman. I was representing their creative talent, their art, their CDs, their DVDs, and their music digitally into 90 plus countries around the world. And so I was taking great music and finding a home for it and getting a distribution royalty every single quarter from those sales. Now, this was in 2004. So fast forward to the end of 2008, I had built Go Global had already earned about $4 million in revenue, not annually, but over the course of that 4 or 5 years, we had done about $4 million in revenue. So it was great for Christian music, which, by the way, that's what I was working in the Christian music field. But at the end of 2008, if you remember in September, a lot of people tell their stories of what happened in 2008. And for me, one of the companies I was working with in England, they went bankrupt. So they could not pay me $50,000 that they owed me for a purchase of some product that I had already shipped to them. So I never was paid by them. So I owed about $30,000 to one of my big clients who I was representing their content. So I was sitting there with $30,000 in debt. Not only that, but the $20,000 that I wasn't going to be getting for income. So it was basically a $50,000 hit. And so I was sitting there, and my client was incredibly gracious. Best thing I could ever do was just tell them the truth, tell them what happened. And they worked with me and enabled me to go on a payment plan with them. But that was one of the best things that could have happened to me, that experience. It was very scary to sit there with that much debt, because I was very much a Dave Ramsey type person. No debt, did not operate with debt, kept a very minimal budget so that we could live and experience all the things that we got to experience the time that I was home with our family and with our kids. But it was great because it enabled me to start thinking differently about, okay, I don't know how this happened. I didn't really think about it this way, but I started thinking about what could happen. How can I pay this debt off? And I started thinking about the possibilities, and one of those possibilities that was right there in front of me was opening a Amazon and eBay store just to pay off the debt, because I had all these relationships with clients that were producing product. What if I bought their product at a deep discount and paid them well, paid them on time, and then sold it on Amazon and eBay? And eBay was still pretty big at the time, but Amazon was really emerging, Amazon merchant sales. So I started selling on Amazon and eBay, and man, like after 1 year, we were doing about 10 to 15,000 a month, especially at our peak times. Like I was shipping sometimes 100 to 200 orders a day in December. There was the whole month of December up through Christmas was just crazy. Right after Thanksgiving through Christmas was nuts. But I loved it. It was so much fun. It was a whole new business model. I got some software that worked. I paid off that debt. The whole idea for me starting that business was just to pay off the debt. That was the goal, but ended up becoming a really good revenue producer for us in 2009, 2010. And it was great too, because I started listening to podcasts when I was doing this shipping. So my day job was still doing international licensing and distribution, but my night job was paying off that debt. And so I turned my garage into a warehouse, into a little fulfillment center, got all the supplies I needed, and we just started shipping audiobooks and CDs and books and DVDs out to customers all around the world. And it was a kind of a great time. I didn't like having to work so much, but I really loved it because I got to sit there, just do manual labor. Eventually I hired people to do that work. But in the beginning, I was doing manual labor and spending a lot of time just listening to podcasts, listening to anything I could get my hands on while I was selling and shipping these products out. And it was very therapeutic in a way.
I love that when you hit, you're kind of in between a rock and a hard place at that season of your life. And I think it's in those pivotal moments that we have that choice to make. Of course, we can have a little pity party and whatever for a minute, but you quickly got up and started to think in terms of solutions. You got creative. Okay, What can I do? I often say, like, if, in terms of thinking, I often say that if nobody else is going to pay your bills, so what really can you do to add extra income? Nobody cares more about it than you do. And I love that you got creative quickly. So how long did you have that store open? Do you still?
No, I actually sold it to I gave it to my mother-in-law, and she ran it from 2013 until she just finally closed the shop down, because it's the marketplace is a little tougher. The margins are tougher, and it's not as much of an income producer as it was back in, up through 2012, 2013. But what enabled me to do it, and I didn't mind like giving that away, because I'll tell you why, because I was working on some new ventures. So when I was listening to podcasts, I began to be opened up to this idea and this world of online marketing, the internet. I'd listened to this podcast called Internet Business Mastery, and it was these two guys talking about how they were able to quit their 9-to-5 and be able to create their own income through selling of courses and just all kinds of content online. And I was fascinated by it. So I studied everything I could get my hands on. I bought their course. Of course, they had a course about making courses. So I bought that. And that's when I started getting into podcasting and realizing that podcasting was something that I loved. I was very good at interviewing people. When I was actually in college, I studied television, radio, broadcast journalism. So it came very naturally to me. And I started to explore, how could I make this happen? Again, thinking about how can I make this happen? Once I had my systems in place for my eBay and Amazon business, and the international sales and distribution business was kind of running its course, and it started to kind of fade. Again, people don't buy CDs anymore, not like they used to, and it's not a very profitable business for me to be in. So I saw the writing on the wall, saw the future, and for me, it was creating courses. So the very first online website that I created was with my wife. She had become, at that point, she had won a Dove Award for this song called Your Great Name. It's a worship song that Natalie Grant released, and a bunch of other people have released since then. And so she started her rise to being a songwriter, just really, really happened very fast from like 2010 to 2012. So during that time, I was also, of course, working with all these artists and these struggling artists and producers and labels, and I had gained a lot of wisdom. So we made a good team, I thought. And so we started this thing called the Music Coaches. And I don't think it's around anymore, but it was the musiccoaches.com. And we started doing webinars, weekly webinars, free webinars for people. And we gained an audience, we gained traction. I started adding to my email list and was able to start getting some clients from that. I never ended up making the course started making courses. I never got to it, but I really learned my chops in doing webinars and starting to work with email lists and was starting to, I had like 1,000 people on this email list. 1,000 people found us just from these free webinars and from search engine optimization on our website. People found us, and Twitter was just kind of getting started then, and Facebook was. So I really kind of got my chops wet. I never made any money in that, but it was it was a great experience. I did make some money. I shouldn't say that, but I never made a ton. I had some clients there, and that was more of an experiment as all these other businesses were sort of running on their own. They were residual income, really, running on their own. So in 2012, I'm sorry, I'll just keep telling more of the story because it's all kind of interconnected. In 2012, as I continued to listen to podcasts, that's when I finally started my first podcast. And I started two of them within a couple of months of each other. The first one was based on something that happened to my wife. My wife in 2012 had a resurgence of Lyme disease. And with that Lyme disease, she was really just down. She couldn't walk. She couldn't do laundry. She was very, very sick. And she had it 10 years previous. And we had thought she was completely healed and well of that. But she started having those same symptoms come up again. And she was very pale. And so that's when we found the product that we found essential oils. And that's when we started a podcast. We got a membership with this network marketing company. And I'd always told Krissy, if you ever find a network marketing company that you love, a product that you love that works for you, I want to help you on the business side, because I had heard from so many people about how important it was to have your own network marketing business, so that you can learn and it's true, you just learn so much about personal development and how business really works, how life really works when you work the business. It's a great personal development tool. So that's when we started our podcast, and in 2012, 2013. And that's when we used all those experiences from the music coaches, and it all kind of culminated in this podcast called Faithful Wellness. And we started to, it was attraction marketing. People started to be attracted to us because of the unique way that we shared and talked about our love for this product.
Wow, I love that. And, it's one thing leads to another, and that's how we consistently evolve. And you might not know the next step, and you might not have ever guessed that essential oils would be your thing, but you continue to take steps, and the how kind of just kind of shows up. And I love that in the midst of the struggle, you look for solutions, and then you continue to grow. And it sounds like you're not somebody to sit back and be bored, but you're like, all right, what's next? I love that. So how long have you been with your company?
We started, my wife enrolled with Dotera in October of 2012. And we started really sharing and doing the business in December of 2012, and we started the podcast in January of 2013. So we're about 5 or so years into it. We're in our 6th year. Very quickly, we rose. One of the things about the podcast that helped us so much was the ability, like I said, the attraction marketing. We had a very simple opt-in that people could that we gave away for free as if they gave us their email address. And people started finding us, and we started getting thousands of listeners every episode. And people found us from Jacksonville, Florida, and Minneapolis, Minnesota, and California, and Maryland, and people just reached out to us and said, "Well, I'm already with Dotera, but I love it. I love what you guys do. I love your faith-based content, and I don't miss an episode." We kind of felt like little mini rock stars. The first convention we went to, we weren't like diamonds yet. The first convention we went to, but people were listening to us and really, really valued what we were providing. But we also found, and we knew we would probably end up recruiting a lot of people through this, and we didn't know how impactful we would actually be to those people until we would have a phone call with them. They'd reach out to us because we kind of put out a little teaser and say, "Hey, if you want to join our team, we're looking for high quality people to join our team." And it wasn't really a big focus of the podcast. It was more about health and wellness and all of that, but we did talk about that. And so we started getting inquiries and people reaching out to us. And our second largest team is in Jacksonville, Florida area, Jacksonville, Orlando. And that was started as a result of this one woman contacting us who was a health coach who was ready to sign up and ready to get going. And we met her, talked to her, had a great conversation. She signed up in April of 2013. On May 10th, Krissy went down there to teach her first class for her. And I think 18 people enrolled that day at the class. And it was just a huge explosion. From there, it just grew and multiplied. And the same thing happened up in Minnesota. Grew and multiplied, and countless other people found us and enrolled because of that. And I was grateful that we could be able to speak into their lives in that way.
You know, I think it's just a testament of adding value. When you're focused on adding value and helping people get better, then everything falls into place, and people come and people say yes, and people follow you, and they feel like they're getting to know you because you're adding value to their lives. And it sounds like you guys have been doing that with your Faithful Wellness podcast. When did you start your Courage podcast?
Well, the Courage Cast was started in 2016 in April, and this month, 2 years ago. But I'll tell you, there's actually a whole part of that story that is actually kind of, I think, the best part of my story. The Courage Cast wouldn't exist if I didn't share this. Okay, in 2013, I also started another podcast as I'm a go-getter, started another podcast, but this was really just for fun. I didn't think it would turn into anything but just a good hang with one of my best friends in my neighborhood. We had moved into a new neighborhood, and this other guy and I, his name was James, we just clicked. We would hang out, he and his family and me and my family, we would hang out at the pool, and we'd share ideas and just dream about things. He was an attorney, and I was, of course, doing all the music industry stuff, and I hadn't even gotten into Dotera yet as we got to know each other. But anyway, we also found a love together for a TV show called The Walking Dead. All right. Have you watched the show?
You know what? I haven't actually. I see it all over Facebook, but I have not watched that show. Okay.
Well, don't worry about seeing it. But it's like the most popular show on cable television. And it's all about the zombie apocalypse. Okay, so this was sort of like a little entertainment thing for me, and I enjoyed it very much. And so James and I started watching the show together when the third season started again. We would just watch the show, and then about 5 episodes in, he had heard about a filming of the show behind the scenes, and we could go and watch. We didn't think we'd be able to watch the filming, but we thought we could just go meet the actors and just kind of be in that environment. And so we went, and it turned out to be the last day of filming for that season. And we had the most amazing time. We met like 8 actors from the show, and we got to watch some filming going on. And people sat down and had coffee with us. It wasn't like a big thing. We were just, maybe there was like 20 fans there watching this all happening. But we just came back from that on such a high that we said, we've got to do something. How can we capture this excitement of what we just did? And so the next week we started the Walker Stalkers podcast, because that's what they called us on the set. We were called Walker Stalkers. James and I were. I
love that.
And because the walkers are zombies. Anyway, long story short, the podcast was a goofy podcast of 2 guys sitting in my basement, but it ended up being, we started to get actors from the show. We started to get cast members from the show to come on our little podcast, and we started getting real listeners. And we ended up once we started getting actors from the show, within 3 months, we were the number 2 overall podcast in news and entertainment for a couple of weeks.
Oh my goodness.
It was massive. Like, we had 50,000 downloads for one of our most popular episodes. And it was just crazy. The fan base and the energy from all of this. And so we started, also we wanted to meet our fans, because we had a lot of listeners, and we did a meetup for the end of season 3. And then so we had about 100 people there, and it was great. We just all met up, watched the episode, had a couple of actors there. Then we scheduled a meetup for the premiere, which was 6 months in advance, and that sold out within minutes. We sold 600 tickets, and during the off season, James and I started brainstorming about creating a convention. So long story short, we set a date for a potential convention. We thought, we'll have like 1,000 people there, 1,500 people there, and meet a few actors, and it'll be great. Well, it turned into a much bigger thing than that. We did a Kickstarter campaign. We ended up risking both of our mortgages to be able to put this convention together. We reserved the America's Mart Convention Center in Atlanta because that's where most of the fan base was living. And that's where all the filming goes on and actors are. So we did it in Atlanta. We reserved the West End Hotel. We booked the entire West End Hotel up. And, we were on the line for like $500,000 putting this event together. It was really scary. I tried to quit 3 times, but James kept talking me out of it. So it was great to have a partner and a buddy in this, because I don't think I would have ever done this alone. Never would I have done this alone. And anyway, the event on November 1st through the 3rd of 2013 had 11,000 people at it.
Wow.
It was absolutely massive, 40 actors. It was like a fan's dream. Like we just wanted to create what we had experienced a year earlier. We wanted to experience that, and it ended up being this massive thing with 300 volunteers. And we made a lot of mistakes. Ends up that this is now the largest touring convention in the world.
So it's something you're still doing?
And no, I am not. Why do I keep selling things and putting things off? Well, the reason I'm not doing it is because my wife hates the show. My wife cannot stand zombies. And to be very serious, I brought this stuff home with me, all this gore, and I'm not even a horror person, but I brought all these like memorabilia and things home. And it was getting very, negative in our house. Krissy and I were just not on the same page. Financially, it was a struggle at first. Why are we doing this? We had a growing Dotera business. We had thousands of people on our team at that point. And we had, her songwriting was going great. I still had Go Global going on a little bit. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this podcast now? Convention. Never thought I'd be a convention promoter, but it was, yeah. So anyway, it was a very quick rise and a quick explosion of growth. And the next year, 2014, we had 4 conventions, and It started to become very profitable. And in 2015, beginning of 2015, we had planned to do, I think, 10 conventions that year in different cities: San Francisco, Chicago, Boston, Orlando, Denver, just all these different cities, Dallas. But it was getting to the point where I had taken my daughter, my 5-year-old daughter, to one of the conventions, and she came home. We were already fighting, my wife and I were fighting tremendously about all of this stuff and all the pressure and all the stress that it was causing. And then I was bringing all this horror stuff home, and it wasn't, like memorabilia and things. And she was just we were not in a good place. And my daughter came back from that convention, and she started having strong fear issues. Like, she was really, really scared. She couldn't sleep by herself. She couldn't even go to school anymore. She was that bad. She kept crying all day long, and she had just started kindergarten, but this was now, November, December of 2014. And we had to pull her out of school. She just could not. It was just, the teacher couldn't handle it. And we pulled her out of school, and we homeschooled her that second half of the year. And she went through some counseling, and it was kind of learned that was a direct result of some trauma. She had seen some things at the convention. People were, they dress up as zombies, and there's blood and gore. It's believe it or not, it's a family-friendly event, but it was just too much for our 5-year-old. Very sensitive, and that was the final straw. So my wife said to me, "You know what, Eric? You can keep doing this with your Walker Stalker friends and all of that, but I'm taking my family. I'm out of here. The kids, me. I'm out of here. If you want to keep doing this, that's fine. But I'm done." And so that was the breaking point for me. I knew I needed to make some different decisions, and I ended up selling my half of the convention and the podcast. I ended up quitting the podcast. I ended up all of that. And we immediately went into some serious counseling, and, it was a lot of healing. But the Courage Cast was a result of about a year and a half of going through some self-evaluation and some real deep look at, okay, what am I doing? How did I get here? What caused all of this? How did Krissy and I get here? And we just went through a really, really difficult time of just kind of unpacking all of the stress and just overwhelm that we were in. And, in April or May of 2016 is where we really finally started to see things break through. And the Courage Cast is a combination of talking about fear, because I learned so much going through this process with the Walker Stalkers that I never would have been able to. I realized I could do so much more than I really thought was ever possible. Both in my Dotera business, we hit Diamond, which is a pretty top rank in Dotera, in 13 months. We did this Walker Stalkers podcast, went from nothing to 11,000 people to the first convention. Now there's 70,000 people come to the Atlanta convention every year. And FanFest, which is the company name now, is in the top 200 of Inc. 500 now. Wow. Has a $50 million valuation. But anyway, it's absolutely crazy what can be accomplished. And so I tell my story on the Courage Cast podcast. I tell my story, but I tell my experiences. I share wisdom, all from a faith-based perspective. So it's really meant to encourage. And I have guests like yourself who are very inspiring, who challenge me. And I always want to be in a place of growth and development. But in the midst of all of that, I want to make sure that I'm keeping what's supposed to be the main thing in my life, which is my relationship with Christ.
Wow, lots of transitions and lots of pivoting and lots of, okay, this isn't working anymore. What do I need to do next? And it sounds like when you did that together with your family, you were able to take steps in the right direction together. But it does start with that communication, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It really, really does. And we realized that one of our biggest problems was communication. I told you earlier, I'm a verbal processor. She is an internal processor. And that is where our wires get crossed. Right there is one of those things. It's like there's a lot of assumptions being made about what I say or do. And that's not exactly what I mean. And so I had to deal with a lot of just communication problems. Interestingly enough, because I took the Dale Carnegie Human Relations and public speaking course, right? You'd think that I'd be able to communicate, but it does take two to communicate well, and it takes listening more than it takes talking to really have good communication, I think.
Well, and I know too, it also is communicating in a way that they hear. Because sometimes we feel like we're doing a great job, but yet it's not perceived that way. So when you guys were going through the evolution, you stopped a thriving business in the midst of it thriving, which I have to say, your Walker Stalker's experience is like an amazing example of finding a niche and creating community, and like everybody wants to be a part of it. I love that. But when you let go of that and you said, okay, I have to pivot and it's time to change, what are some of the biggest aha moments you had throughout those growth years?
Yeah. Well, I learned that I need to stop saying yes to everyone. And I started analyzing, why was I saying yes all the time? Some of it was fear of missing out. Some of it was I didn't want to miss out on some fun, and I might as well just go for it. I learned that that I can never let someone else rule my life. I basically, with my partnership with James, he didn't do anything wrong. He was just moving forward. I was letting him. I was letting him make decisions for my family. I was allowing him and his dream to rule how I was spending my time. It not only, but it would have been fine if it had just been me. I was willing to make that sacrifice, but my family, my wife, was not willing to make that sacrifice. She didn't know what she was getting into. she didn't know what I was getting her into. And I didn't stop and take her seriously enough when she gave me those red flags. When, your spouse is there for you to speak into your life. I think my wife has a tremendous amount of wisdom, tremendous amount of insight and intuition to and discernment to know what is right, what is wrong. And, gosh darn it, I'm an only child. And I never had anybody speak that into me. I was pretty much, I made my own decisions. It was all good. But having to work with a partner who thinks differently and wants different things, you got to make sure that you're always communicating. I needed to make sure that I'm always communicating what my intentions are, what my dreams are, and making sure that we're in line and in step with each other, supporting one another, or else it can be a train wreck like my life was at the beginning of 2015.
So what does your family look like now? And what does your life look like now?
Yeah, we had about 2 years of really tough times. It was a lot of things that it actually got worse before it got better. We had lots of arguments about stuff that happened a long time ago, even before all this started. Things that Krissy had been carrying, and things that I was carrying, baggage from things that happened with her that I just sort of stuffed away. So we had to unpack that. We went through a tremendous amount of counseling and coaching. But the breakthrough for me was the coaching that I finally got back into working with a coach who helped me to not, and this time it was a woman, and she was very tough, more tough than my other coach was 10 years before. She was tough. She wouldn't let me get away with things. She would not let me put on a fake. She really asked me questions and probed why was I doing the things I was doing, not in a judgmental way, but just in is this really lining up with the vision that you have for yourself? She taught me how to have a vision and go for that vision and act in line with that vision, rather than let someone else determine my vision, which is what I had been doing. I'd even been letting my wife determine my vision. You heard many times in my story how I just went with what was working for her. I would support her and saw that as a way for us to kind of work together. And so it was all about determining my vision and acting and speaking in line with how I wanted that vision to play out in my life. So how is my family now? We are still married. We are very happily married. We communicate way better than we did. We still have some rough spots like any marriage does, but it does not blow up into something that is bigger than it should. We've healed a lot of the wounds from the past, and when we still need to learn how to communicate and listen for. We need to listen out of curiosity, listen for understanding of one another, rather than listen for maybe one of the things that we used to do a lot was when we would talk, it was almost like we didn't hear the other person talk. We already assumed they had a bad intention. And even no matter when either one of us said something, it was almost like it didn't matter what we said. It was already decided that that I had a bad motivation. So we had to kind of start to listen to just get curious with one another and believe that what that person was saying was actually really what they intended to say and what they really meant, if that makes any sense. So we listen a lot more to one another now than talk.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I think when you're walking on eggshells or it feels like you have a bit of resentment build up, then no matter what the other person says, you kind of respond with that resentment first. And once the healing happens, then so many walls are broken down and your heart is opened, and then you can learn to communicate and even trust each other again.
Yes, yes. And we are so blessed. I mean, in the midst of that, we were experiencing tremendous growth financially, tremendous growth in our relationship with our kids. I've been blessed to be able to stay home with my kids for their entire, like, since they've been, my son was 5 and my other son was 3, and now my daughter who's 9. I've always been here. I've always been able to determine my own schedule, and it wouldn't be if it wasn't for all of these business ventures and things that I developed with the residual income, et cetera. But even it just goes to show you, sometimes when you're home all the time, that's where things, business mixes with personal, and sometimes those boundary lines were overstepped and have been overstepped. I mean, we work together in business. We work together at home. We've raised these children together, and sometimes it's really, really important that you set those clear boundaries. I like that you go out on dates with your husband. You have set intentional times with your family, and that's really one of the other things I've really learned is how to separate business from personal and be able to have those intentional times with the family.
You are a serial entrepreneur, and so I can see as a goal getter, you're focused and moving and think everybody's kind of following you and on the same page as you, and you look back and they're not. It takes a minute to slow yourself down and say, okay, let's do this together. What is life going to look like? So what is your new vision?
Well, we are headed straight for the next 2 ranks in Dotera. And that's one of the main things. I'm trying to focus on one thing and one thing only, and that is our work with Dotera. I have a few other consulting commitments that I took on that I'm going to be finishing up this summer. But then after that, it is gung-ho with our Dotera business. We've got about 6,000 or 7,000 people in our organization, and I work with some amazing leaders. And the interesting thing is they're all women, but I work with a lot of the women now are bringing their husbands home or beginning to bring their husbands home. So the more I can help them, and the more I can help them achieve their dreams and goals in their businesses, the more we're going to succeed, of course. So it's really about just having the time to invest in those people, and that's what I'm looking forward to doing in this year. So we have a pretty big goal for this year, which is the next highest rank with Blue Diamond, and then next year is presidential. But one 90-day period at a time. So.
Right. And I love you said one thing, focus on one thing, do it well, and create momentum in that area. Whereas previously you had lots of businesses going and you were a jack of all trades and you were working, working at both ends because you were in getting up early and staying up late and all of those things. And so now it seems like you're balancing your family, balancing your time, and focusing to create that momentum.
That's right. It's the best thing you can do.
Now, I've got a few more questions for you. One question is, you said the Courage Cast would not have been created if it weren't for the struggle and the mud that you guys walked through. Why do you think that is?
Well, because if I hadn't have gone through the excitement and if I hadn't have been able to do that with the Walker Stalkers, if that hadn't happened, then I would not be able to tell someone that virtually anything that you dream to do is possible. Because being around James, he is a high D type of person. And so being around people like that who are drivers and go-getters and just make it happen, are relentless in their pursuit and almost reckless sometimes in their pursuit, I saw the kind of action that was required to be able to do what we did in a very short amount of time with the Walker Stalkers. Like I said, I did way more than I ever thought was possible with this. I mean, we had Rolling Stone magazine and MTV and CNN coming, and it's crazy the type of press and the whole experience was just incredible. It was everything that I had sort of dreamed of when I was sitting there listening to podcasts about internet business mastery and creating community, and developing relationships with people and being an influencer. And that's all of that was able to be possible if it wasn't for the Walker Stalkers. Now, the downside of that was it was the how I did that. It was the how I did that. It wasn't the what, but it was really the how I did that got me into trouble. So I'm very vulnerable on the podcast about my mistakes and the mistakes I continue to make. I was very vulnerable on the Courage Cast when I shared about the fact that I realized I was lying a lot of the time, that I was not that I was lying almost to myself. Like I didn't even realize what I was hiding from Krissy because I didn't want her to know that I was, spending even more time on the Walker Stalkers kind of behind the scenes. I didn't want her to know I was editing another podcast or doing another interview. And so I would kind of do these things behind her back when she was out writing or doing things like that. And it was just wrong. So there was just a lot of moral things that I talk about on the Courage Cast. Having the courage to admit when you do things like that, when you are wrong, is so important. It's really important to live an honest, truthful life, not just in front of others, but to yourself on the inside. What matters, what goes on the inside in your head and your heart is absolutely critical to creating a life that is so rich. It's not about even money at that point. It's just about living a rich life where you're at peace with yourself and you're at peace with others. I talk about those things. I talk about what I struggle with, what I'm working on, what inspires me, just anything that comes my way. I am quick to get on the Courage Cast, even if it has to be from my phone driving in the car and it's a thought that I just can't get out of my head, and I will just record it. And then I'll put it on the podcast. It's very raw and real, almost journal-like. But I'm hopeful that when I'm vulnerable and honest with others, that they can see a little bit of themselves in me and recognize and realize that they're going to be okay and that they can do it. They can do more than they think they could if they just live towards that truth and go for peace in their heart and their head.
That's beautiful. Who would you say mentors you today? It sounds like you've had lots of mentors, business coaches, but then business partners and people who've influenced you. Who do you look to for influence now?
Well, I'm really looking for a mentor in my business right now. That's something I'm missing right at this moment, to be honest. In the meantime, I am seeking out mentors through books I read, and conversations I have, like I had with you on Tuesday. I'm reading like crazy. I'm reading scripture. I'm reading just books. I have about 30 books that I have yet to get to. So I'm devouring these things and trying to glean as much as I can from those. And they're my mentors right now. They're my virtual mentors. They sit on my board of directors, my own personal board of directors. But the people that are there a lot, I refer back to Dave Ramsey quite a bit. Dave is what he's built through financial peace and through his company. I've studied him, and he definitely sits on my board, not just on my financial, not my CFO only. He's also a great CEO mentor. So he would be definitely one of those people. But I'm looking for a business mentor that I can meet with on a regular basis. More than a coach, I'm looking for someone who's doing what I'm doing. There's very few guys that are in our business. I don't know about It Works, but I know there are a few guys in mine that really do it well and will make the time for me.
What would you say has been one of the best books that you've read throughout your journey?
Talk about all these books, right? And I can't think of one. I will say that one of the best books currently is the book Exponential by Dave Ferguson. He is actually a church planter, but he is very entrepreneurial minded, and it's all about raising up leaders and multiplying leaders of leaders. So if you want to be a leader of leaders, read the book Exponential. It's powerful. He has one thing in there that I refer to a lot these days, and it's really just about transferring and discipling other people one-on-one. One of the things I do really well is I'm great at speaking to large groups, speaking principles and methodology and teaching into large groups. But what I don't do as well is sitting one-on-one with one leader at a time. And so the book challenges me to, when I'm teaching a class, to making sure that I always have someone that's my disciple or somebody that I'm mentoring with me when I'm teaching a class. It doesn't really, our business is about duplication, right? And I've got to be able to duplicate what I do into other people. And so I have to make it simple. I have to make it clear, but I have to have somebody there with me. And I love this principle of there's 5 steps to discipleship or 5 steps to leadership, multiplying leadership. The first step is I do, you watch, and then we talk. So I'm teaching the class. The person that I'm discipling is just watching me teach the class, and then we talk about it afterwards. What went well? Did you notice this happened? I said this. You know why I said this, and we just talk about it. The second thing is I do, you help, and then we talk. So you begin to take on a little bit more of the responsibility, but not the whole responsibility. Like I'll still probably close, but they might teach in the middle. The third is they teach, I help, you, then we talk. So they teach, I help, we talk. So I'm just helping with part of it. They teach the majority of it. Maybe I'll help with the close or some other part. And then we talk about it. And then the fourth time, they teach, I watch, we talk. So I don't have any part to do in it other than observe and talking about it afterwards to kind of tweak some things. And then the fifth time, they teach and someone else watches. So I've handed off the baton, and they are working on mentoring their next person through. And so then the baton's passed and the circle is completed. And that's really what mentorship and discipleship and leadership is all about. So
I love that. Book. Yeah, that's duplication at its core, is really raising somebody else up to do what you do.
Yeah.
So one last question, and this is kind of silly, but I'm so intrigued that you worked in the music industry for so long, because there's so many people I love there. So who's been, what's the coolest Christian artist meeting that you have had?
I have met a lot of them. The movie that just came out called I Can Only Imagine with Mercy Me as kind of the story behind it. So I've worked a lot with Bart Millard and Mercy Me. So that was pretty cool. I worked with Sixpence None the Richer and Michael W. Smith, Amy Grant, just all of those kind of well-known, Jackie Velasquez, those artists over the years, Tammy Trent, who's from Michigan as well. But probably the funniest interaction I've ever had with an artist, because I took a lot of these artists overseas. So I would travel with them to Europe, and we would spend, a week touring places together. And so we'd always have some great experiences just doing stuff like that. But the funniest experience I had was backstage when my wife finally got to meet her hero, Amy Grant. She got to meet Amy Grant, and we were about to meet her, and she was just standing there, meeting and greeting with everybody behind and backstage. And Amy Grant turns to Krissy and me, and she goes, "Hey, is this your dad?" Like, she thought Krissy was like my daughter. So that was the first funny thing. And then we laughed. But Krissy started talking to her about how much Amy meant to her. And Amy got this thing in her throat. She just started coughing. And it just got worse and worse and worse. She kept coughing and coughing. And she tried to listen, but she just kept coughing. And Krissy never got to tell got a word in to her at all. And that was her only time that she got to meet Amy Grant. So I've got to figure out how we can get her to meet her again somehow. And honestly, a dream is for her to write with her. So she's a pro writer. Krissy a pro writer. Yeah, I think it will.
It will. Well, thank you so much, Eric, for sharing your story with us. I mean, you are truly a go-getter. You're a serial entrepreneur. You're an opportunist, meaning it seems like you always have your eyes open to what's next and what's coming. And you've learned so many things along your journey. I think being mentored by your dad and participating in that event when you were just 16 to hanging around the successful music industry and seeing that these are just normal people too, who have big dreams and big goals and work hard. It's really helped to shape you and not just shape you, but shape how you relate to others, because you know that anything is truly possible. And I love that your mission is to kind of cast that belief and vision into your audience and into your team. So where can we find you? Definitely check out the Courage Cast. Are you on Facebook, Instagram?
Yes, you can find the Courage Cast on Facebook. You can find, you can go to our website, courageouscommunity.com. That's the place to plug in. Everything is there, and you can just connect to all the different ways to connect with the community. We have a pretty thriving Facebook group. We've got about 2,000 in the Facebook group. So people just being courageous and doing the same things that I'm doing. So it's fun.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your journey. It's been a pleasure getting to know you. And I know that whatever goal you set for yourself, you are going to hit it. And you're not going to hit it this time leaving your family behind you. You're going to hit it thriving with everybody, like locking arms and doing it together. And I'll be following your journey on that as well.
Amen. Thanks, Denise. That's what I want.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Have an amazing day.
Thank you so much for listening today. Head over to denisewalsh.com. Enter your email to subscribe to our list, and I'll be sending out an early bird special coupon. 50% off, in fact, of the Dream Life Workbook when it is launched in just a few months. So if you want to have first dibs, let's get your name on that list. Thanks again. I so appreciate you. And remember to dream big.